My name is Elena Hart, and this Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be peaceful or at least pretend to be. But that illusion shattered the moment my sister's fiancé lifted his glass, smirked, and said, "So, Elena, still working in your pajamas? Must be nice not having a real job." Everyone laughed. Even my dad joined in, shaking his head. "Elena, stop making the family look bad," he said, like it was me ruining the night, not the insult, not the years of being dismissed, but me. I stayed quiet, letting them talk, until Ethan, the fiancé, bragged about a new deal his company had made with a small tech startup. That's when I smiled, pulled out my phone, and watched every grin at that table disappear. Have you ever been humiliated by the very people who are supposed to be proud of you? Tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? My father, Robert Hart, has always believed that real success wears a suit and tie. In his mind, a respectable life means an office downtown, a desk with your nameplate on it, and a steady paycheck that shows up every other Friday. He's the kind of man who irons his shirts even on weekends and judges people by the firmness of their handshake. To him, work is something you can see: briefcases, board meetings, coffee in paper cups. Anything outside of that, especially creative work or technology, feels suspiciously like pretending. My mother, Linda, is softer in voice, but not in conviction. She believes in presentation: the perfect home, the polite smile, the good impression. Her favorite phrase, the one she's whispered to me since I was little, is, "Don't embarrass the family." She says it with love, or at least she thinks she does. But it lands like a warning every time, shaping how I breathe when I'm around them. And then there's my sister, Sophia, 30, graceful, effortlessly radiant, the woman who never seems to sweat under the lights. In our family, Sophia has always been the standard everyone else is measured against. Homecoming queen, straight-A student, married young to a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, divorced gracefully when it all fell apart. And now engaged again to Ethan Price, the man my parents describe as a real catch. He works in finance, they say, as if that explains everything good about him. He's charming, ambitious, always knows the right wine to order. My mother glows when she talks about him, and my father calls him the kind of man who gets things done. I nod politely when they do, pretending I don't notice the way they look at me after, like they're silently comparing. What they don't know, what I've never told them, is that I've built something of my own. While Sophia was collecting trophies and engagement rings, I was learning to build systems that actually worked. I studied computer science at MIT, then took a leap and started my own company, ClearPoint Analytics. It began in my small apartment, just me and an old laptop, writing lines of code that made more sense to me than any family conversation ever had. Over time, ClearPoint grew quietly. Now, it sells predictive data tools to retail companies, helping them forecast demand, manage inventory, save millions. It's not glamorous, not something you see on a billboard, but it pays more than I'll ever need. I could buy a house tomorrow, but I still rent a modest apartment because I like the freedom. I live simply, and most days, happily. But to my family, I'm still the one who hasn't figured it out yet. The one still playing around with computers. My father once told a family friend, right in front of me, "Elena's doing that tech thing for now, but she'll settle down eventually." I smiled then too, because that's easier than explaining what I actually do. They wouldn't understand the value of a company that exists mostly online, or how contracts can close over email, or that data can be more powerful than money itself. To them, if it's not bricks, paper, or something you can touch, it's not real. Sometimes, I wonder if that's why I've kept ClearPoint a secret. Not out of shame, but out of peace. It's quieter this way. Let them believe what they want to believe. Let Sophia be the star, Dad the head of the house, Mom the peacekeeper. I've learned that when a family builds its identity on appearances, truth feels like an unwelcome guest. Still, this Thanksgiving feels different. Sophia's new fiancé, Ethan, will be there for the first time. Mom's been buzzing about it for weeks. He's brilliant, Elena. He's doing so well in finance. You should talk to him about your career. Maybe he can give you advice. Advice. The word makes me smile, though not in the way she expects. Because I've met men like Ethan before, too polished, too practiced, the kind who mistake confidence for character. And something about him doesn't sit right. Maybe it's the way Sophia talks about him, like she's trying to convince herself. Or maybe it's just the tone my father uses when he says his name, full of admiration but empty of understanding. I can already picture the dinner table, Ethan charming everyone, Sophia glowing beside him, my parents beaming. And me, the quiet one at the end, smiling through small talk and careful jokes, pretending not to notice the way they look at me. But this year, I'm not the same Elena they think I am. This year, the woman who builds systems that predict the future will finally stop pretending she can't see the patterns in her own family. They want a perfect Thanksgiving. They'll get one, just not the kind they planned. The message came early that week. It was from my mother, short and perfectly punctuated like everything she wrote. Thanksgiving dinner, 6 p.m. sharp. Sophia's fiancé will be here. No emoji, no greeting, just a command disguised as an invitation. That was how she always phrased things, like she was running a performance, and everyone had their assigned roles. Last year, I skipped Thanksgiving. I told them I had a deadline, which wasn't a lie, but not the whole truth either. I just couldn't handle another night of pretending. 2 days later, Mom called me crying. She said I was breaking her heart, that families were supposed to be together on holidays. You don't even try to fit in anymore, she'd said through soft sobs. I remember sitting on my couch, staring at the glow of my laptop, feeling guilty even though I knew she cared more about appearances than my company. That memory stayed with me, heavy and unfinished. So this year, when the text came, I sighed and typed back, "I'll be there." Then I added nothing more. Still, I made one small decision for myself. I'd arrive 10 minutes late. Just enough time for them to get comfortable, to finish setting the scene before I walked in. I didn't want to be part of the warm-up act. I wanted to step in once the show had already begun. The day of Thanksgiving came faster than I expected. Outside, the Boston air was sharp and gray, and my street smelled faintly of pine from the neighbors' early decorations. I stood in front of my closet for a while, choosing something plain but neat: black sweater, dark jeans, boots, nothing fancy, nothing that could be picked apart. I didn't need comments about trying too hard. Oh. As I gathered my things, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Reflexively, I checked it. It was from a client inquiry folder at work. My company's automated system flagged potential business partners who wanted access to our predictive platform. I scrolled through the names, half distracted, until one of them made me pause. Ethan Price. For a second, I thought I'd misread it. But there it was, his name, his corporate email address, his company, Price and Patterson Holdings. He'd requested access to our API data for financial forecasting, pending review. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. My first instinct was to laugh quietly, disbelievingly. Of course. The finance expert my parents adored was, apparently, trying to buy access to my company's technology. My technology. He probably didn't even know whose system he was requesting permission from. That thought made me smirk a little. I clicked open the file. His request was poorly written, filled with vague buzzwords, leveraging predictive synergy, real-time data momentum. The kind of fluff people use when they want to sound smarter than they are. I closed the screen and locked my phone. I didn't plan to say anything. Not yet. But something inside me shifted. I'd been walking into these family gatherings for years, quietly bracing myself to be the odd one out. The overlooked daughter. The afterthought. But now, holding that little piece of truth in my pocket, I felt something new: calm power. Before leaving, I stood by my window for a moment, watching the cold November sky. I thought about how my family would be fussing over table settings right now, how Sophia would be arranging her curls, how Dad would be practicing his little speech about gratitude and family unity. And Ethan, he'd be there too, probably straightening his tie, ready to impress everyone with stories about the real business world. I slipped my phone into my coat pocket and whispered to myself, half amused, half resolute, "Name sounds familiar, doesn't it?" Then I grabbed my keys, stepped out into the cold, and headed toward the dinner that, for once, wasn't going to go exactly as they planned. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was glowing like a postcard, every window lit, candles flickering in the windowsills, and the smell of roasted turkey spilling out through the cracks in the door. It looked warm, perfect, almost staged. I stood outside for a moment, my breath clouding the air, before finally walking up the steps and ringing the bell. My mother opened the door, her lipstick perfectly matched to her cranberry-colored blouse. Her smile faltered for just a second when she saw me. "You're late," she said softly, though the edge in her voice was clear. "Traffic," I replied, hanging up my coat. My father appeared behind her, wearing his usual Thanksgiving uniform, a beige sweater, and a look of mild disapproval. "We were about to start," he said, as if the entire meal hinged on my punctuality. The dining room looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. The table stretched long and gleaming, set with polished silverware, gold-trimmed plates, and crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandelier. A centerpiece of orange leaves, small pumpkins, and white candles ran down the middle. My mother had clearly spent hours perfecting it, and I could practically feel her satisfaction radiating from every detail. At the far end of the table sat Sophia, radiant as ever, in a champagne-colored dress. And beside her, standing as soon as he noticed me, was Ethan. He was tall, neatly groomed, and already halfway through a glass of red wine. His smile was wide, too wide. "Well," he said, stepping forward with his hand out. "You must be the famous little sister I've heard so much about, Elena, right?" I shook his hand. His grip was firm but performative, the kind that was meant to impress rather than connect. "That's me," I said, polite but distant. "I hear you're in tech," he continued, sliding back into his chair. "Doing something with data? Computers?" He chuckled as if the entire concept was amusing. "Something like that," I replied, taking my seat across from him. "Oh," he said, glancing at Sophia with a grin. "So you're one of those people who can work in pajamas all day?" Sophia laughed first, high and clear, like a cue for the rest of the table. "I told you," she said. "She's the type who never leaves the house. Total introvert." My father smiled awkwardly, and my mother let out the kind of laugh that wasn't quite a laugh, more like a sigh dressed up to sound polite. I smiled faintly, stirring my water. "Yeah," I said. "That sounds about right." Ethan leaned back, pleased with himself. "Hey, don't get me wrong," he said. "It must be nice not having a boss breathing down your neck. Though, I imagine it gets boring without real challenges." My mother cleared her throat softly. "Ethan's just teasing, honey," she said quickly. "You know how people joke." "I know," I said, keeping my tone gentle. But then my father added, as he sliced into the turkey, "He's right about one thing. It's important to be around real people, Elena. These computers can't replace the world." "Of course, Dad," I said. He smiled, pleased that I didn't argue. "Good, I'm glad you understand. You've always been sensitive." That word sensitive landed like a pebble dropped into a still pond. It rippled through the table, unseen but felt. The conversation moved on to safe topics: holiday travel, weather, the Patriots game, but I barely heard it. I watched the way Ethan dominated the conversation with his easy confidence, how he sprinkled financial jargon like confetti, how Sophia's eyes sparkled every time he spoke. My parents hung on his every word. "So, Ethan," my father said proudly, "tell us about your job. You're in finance, right?" Ethan's smile grew. "Yeah, I manage investment portfolios. Our firm works with high-value clients, real movers and shakers." Big money, big stakes. It's exciting stuff. Mom clasped her hands together. That sounds so impressive. It is, he said, smirking. You have to be sharp in my line of work. Not everyone can handle that kind of pressure. He glanced at me when he said it, just long enough for me to notice. I sipped my water, saying nothing. He went on, telling some story about a client who made a risky investment and how he saved the day. Sophia leaned into him, glowing with pride. My mother looked enchanted, and my father nodded like a man approving of a son he never had. When there was a pause, my mother turned to me. And you, dear? How's your little project going? I almost smiled at the phrasing little project. It's going fine, I said. Busy, but good. I bet. Good, Dad said quickly, as if closing a topic before it could start. You'll find your place soon enough. The words rolled off his tongue like something rehearsed. Ethan chuckled. She's already got her place, Bob front row seat to the digital world. He raised his glass toward me. To pajamas and Wi-Fi. Laughter rippled around the table again. I felt the familiar sting of being the punchline, but I'd grown used to it. I let the moment pass, my face calm, my voice even. Cheers, I said softly, clinking my glass against the air. My mother shifted in her chair. Don't take it the wrong way, Elena. He's just teasing. He doesn't mean anything by it. I know, I said, still smiling. My father looked at me then, that steady, stern gaze that used to stop me mid-sentence when I was a kid. Elena, he said, his voice low but firm. Let's not ruin the evening with tension, okay? You know I hate it when things get uncomfortable during the holidays. And then came the familiar phrase, the one I'd been waiting for since I walked through the door. Don't make the family look bad. It was supposed to sound like advice, but it landed like a command. I nodded once, swallowing down whatever I might have said. Around me, the laughter started up again, warm and hollow, bouncing off the walls of that perfect dining room. I sat back, silent, watching them all, my polished father, my careful mother, my glowing sister, and her perfect fiancé. They looked so proud of themselves, so sure of their little world. And for the first time, I realized I didn't feel like I was sitting at that table. I felt like I was watching it from the outside, waiting for the curtain to drop. Ethan kept talking, the way people do when they believe every sentence they say is a performance worth watching. He was halfway through his second glass of wine now, spinning another story about the real world. In finance, he said, resting one elbow on the table. You can't hide behind a screen or a keyboard. It's the big leagues, face-to-face deals, real pressure, real results. That's the difference between tech folks and people like us. We actually build things that matter. My mother nodded approvingly, as if the gospel had just been spoken. My father hummed his agreement. Sophia smiled with the kind of pride that comes from being on the winning team. I smiled too, but mine didn't reach my eyes. I'd heard versions of that speech all my life, words dressed as wisdom, delivered by people who thought they understood the world better than I ever could. It didn't matter that my company had quietly helped a dozen others avoid financial collapse during the pandemic, or that our software had saved millions in losses. Those victories were invisible here. Here, what mattered was posture, polish, and the illusion of importance. Ethan had all three. He leaned back, swirling his wine, and grinned at me. You know what I mean, right, Elena? You can't just code your way through life. Eventually, you've got to step into the real world. Sophia giggled, brushing his arm. Ethan, stop teasing her. He laughed. I'm just saying, it's easy to play entrepreneur when you don't have real clients breathing down your neck. Real-world stress separates the dreamers from the doers. I took a small sip of water to buy myself time. I guess we just define real world differently, I said lightly. Oh, come on, he replied, grinning wider. I'm just joking, don't take it so seriously. I'm not, I said softly, and smiled again. My mother jumped in quickly, like a referee afraid the game might turn rough. He's only playing around, honey. You know how men talk when they're proud of what they do. Of course, I said. I understand. But inside, something twisted. The same dull ache I'd felt as a child began to hum in my chest, the one that came every time my efforts were brushed aside because they didn't fit into the family's version of success. I thought of the day I received my scholarship letter from MIT, how I'd run into the kitchen, waving the envelope, breathless with joy. My father had been reading the newspaper, and he'd looked up only long enough to say, "That's good, sweetheart. Just don't let it interfere with Sophia's college plans." That. Sophia had smiled then too, in that soft, perfect way she always did when she knew she'd already won. I remember standing there, my heart pounding, realizing even in that moment of triumph, I was still a shadow in my own home. And now, all these years later, nothing had changed. The faces were older, the table fancier, the food richer, but the feeling was the same. I was still the one they tolerated, not celebrated. Still the one whose silence made everything easier for them. Ethan began another story, something about a crazy week at the firm and a client who'd lost millions. He acted like he'd personally carried the economy on his back. The words washed over me like static. My parents leaned in, captivated, nodding as if they understood a single thing he was saying. Sophia laughed at all the right moments, her hand resting on his arm like punctuation. I barely heard any of it. I just kept watching them, their perfect tableau of admiration and pride, and wondered how many times I'd mistaken being polite for being small. Then came the part that made my stomach tighten. Ethan said, "People think money management is all numbers and luck, but it's about instinct. Knowing where to place your bets, reading people, that's what separates amateurs from professionals." My father chuckled. "Now that's something I wish Elena would learn. You can't get far in life just hiding behind a screen." "Dad," Sophia said playfully, "be nice. She's doing fine." "Of course she is," he said. "I'm just saying she's always been a bit too quiet for her own good." Too quiet. Sensitive. The family echo chamber was alive and well. I smiled again, because that was what was expected of me. The smile of someone who didn't make trouble, who didn't ruin the evening. But inside, the silence started to feel heavy. Not empty pressured. Like a balloon stretched too tight. The room filled with laughter again. Ethan had told another joke, and everyone leaned into it. I didn't even catch the punchline this time. Instead, I found myself studying his face, the perfect confidence, the easy grin. The way he looked at Sophia, not like she was a person, but a trophy. And I thought about the email, his request sitting quietly in my inbox. Ethan Price. Price and Patterson Holdings. Access to my platform. The irony of it was almost too rich. I took another sip of water, steady and slow. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them talk about the real world and success and all the things they think I don't understand. Because soon enough, they would. For now, I just sat there, quiet as ever, smiling the same small smile they'd mistaken for weakness my entire life. They had no idea that behind that silence was the one thing they couldn't see coming: knowledge. And as Ethan raised his glass again to toast to family, I lifted mine too, eyes calm, heart steady, already imagining how different next year's Thanksgiving table was going to look. Dessert had just been served, store-bought pumpkin pie pretending to be homemade, when Ethan leaned back in his chair, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked perfectly at ease, the king of a small kingdom that didn't realize it was made of glass. "You know," he began, swirling his wine, "our firm just closed a pretty big deal. We're about to partner with a small analytics startup." What was the name again? He snapped his fingers, pretending to remember. Clearpoint Analytics, that's it. Tiny operation, really. Some coding outfit trying to punch above their weight. We're basically doing them a favor. For a second, my body went still. My fork hovered in midair. Across the table, my mother clapped her hands softly. "That's wonderful, Ethan. Always growing, always achieving. I'm so proud of you. Sophia beamed beside him. ClearPoint Analytics, that sounds so techy. I bet they're thrilled to work with you. Ethan chuckled. Oh, definitely. For companies like that, getting our partnership is life-changing. I mean, this is probably the biggest thing that'll ever happen to them. The laughter that followed was light and harmless, at least to everyone else. My father joined in with a low approving hum. See, Elena, he said, gesturing toward Ethan with his fork. This is what I'm talking about. Real business, real accomplishment. You should learn from him. That's a man who's going places. My hand tightened around my glass. The faint clink it made against the table was swallowed by their voices. I took a slow breath, forcing my smile to stay steady. You're right, Dad, I said softly. I think I can learn a lot from him. Ethan smirked, clearly pleased with himself. Hey, I'm happy to give career advice anytime. Maybe I can help you figure out what's next for your tech stuff. Sophia giggled. See? He's such a mentor type. I nodded politely, setting my glass down. That's generous of you, Ethan. He lifted his wine in a mock toast. Always happy to help the next generation of dreamers. The words hung there for a moment, floating over the sound of silverware and polite laughter. My parents looked at him like he'd just given a TED Talk. Sophia looked proud, radiant, invincible. And I just watched them all, my pulse steady but rising. ClearPoint Analytics. My company. My work. My name on every document, every patent, every deal. And there he was, bragging about how he was doing them a favor. I'd built that company from the ground up. I'd stayed up through nights of debugging until dawn, negotiated with clients twice my age, signed contracts he probably couldn't even read without a glossary. And now, he was sitting across from me in my parents' dining room, talking about my company as if it were a lucky charity case. The irony was almost poetic. I caught Sophia looking at me, smiling faintly as if she thought I'd finally been inspired by Ethan's example. My mother's eyes were bright with pride, and my father leaned back in satisfaction, as though his lecture had finally sunk in. For a long, quiet moment, I just let it sit there. The perfect family tableau. The successful son-in-law, the golden daughter, the proud parents, and me, the silent observer, the harmless background character. I almost laughed. Instead, I smoothed my napkin on my lap, looked up, and smiled the calmest smile I'd worn all evening. ClearPoint Analytics. I repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. That's a good company. I've heard they do excellent work. Ethan nodded, his grin smug. Yeah, they're fine. Nothing groundbreaking, but they'll get to brag about partnering with us for years. That's a win for them. My father chuckled approvingly. Exactly. That's how the world works, Elena. Big fish, little fish. You just have to know your place. I turned to him, still smiling, though my voice came out smooth and cool. Oh, I do, Dad. I think tonight made that very clear. He didn't notice the edge beneath the words, but Ethan did. His confident smirk flickered for half a heartbeat, unsure if he'd missed the joke. I picked up my glass again and twirled it between my fingers. Funny thing, though, I said lightly. I've always admired people who believe they're the biggest fish in the pond. It makes it so satisfying when they realize the water's deeper than they thought. Ethan laughed uncertainly, glancing at Sophia. Guess I'll drink to that, he said, forcing a chuckle. Mom smiled tightly, sensing tension she didn't understand. All right, everyone, let's not get philosophical on Thanksgiving, she said quickly. We're celebrating, remember? Of course, I said. We wouldn't want to ruin the perfect dinner. The table relaxed again, chatter returning to normal. I stayed quiet, chewing slowly, tasting every word they'd said as if it were something I had to digest before letting it go. But I wasn't angry, not exactly. What I felt was colder, clearer, because now I knew that I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to explain. The truth already existed, it was sitting right there in front of them, and soon it would speak for itself. I looked around the table one more time, the candlelight flickering across their faces, their laughter filling the room like static, and thought to myself, let them enjoy this moment. Because by the time dessert plates were cleared, the smiles they were so proud of would start to fade. No one called that night. No text, no voicemail, no, let's talk about this. Just silence thick and echoing. When I left the house, the cold air hit my face like water after a long fever. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I found myself walking along the Charles River, the wind carrying the faint hum of the city, the water reflecting the distant lights like 1,000 small confessions. I tucked my hands into my pockets and let my breath form small clouds in front of me. For the first time all evening, I could breathe freely. But the air didn't taste like victory. It tasted like distance. I replayed the looks on their faces, the confusion, the disbelief, the cracks in my father's certainty, the hurt behind my mother's silence. Sophia's expression lingered the longest. It wasn't anger or humiliation. It was something else, shock, maybe. Or guilt. And Ethan's face, that one, I didn't need to remember. It would fade easily enough, like a cheap print in the rain. People always assume moments like that feel triumphant, that truth landing on the table would come with a burst of satisfaction. But it didn't. The silence that followed me out of that house wasn't power. It was grief. Grief for all the years I spent trying to earn a kind of love that was always conditional, polished, public, and never quite real. The city lights blurred in the water as I walked. My footsteps echoed softly on the path. I thought about how strange it was to expose a truth and still feel small afterward, like I'd ripped open a curtain only to find an empty stage. Days passed quietly. No calls, no messages. Not even a forwarded family recipe or a polite check-in from my mother. I kept working, kept coding, kept showing up for my team meetings on Zoom, my voice even, my posture steady. But the quiet outside the screen felt heavier every night. Then, a week later, a message appeared. It was from Sophia. Can we talk? Just us. I stared at the text for a long time before replying. Sure, name the place. She suggested a small cafe near Beacon Hill, the kind of quiet spot you'd miss if you weren't looking. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window with her hands wrapped around a mug. For once, she wasn't dressed like a magazine cover. No makeup. No carefully curled hair. Just Sophia, pale and tired. When she saw me, she gave a small, uncertain smile. Hey, she said softly. Hey, I replied, taking the seat across from her. For a while, neither of us spoke. The hum of the espresso machine filled the silence. Then she said it barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't rush to fill the pause. She kept her eyes on the steam rising from her cup. I didn't know about the company, she continued. Or that Ethan was using your name. He told me he'd been working with a brilliant analytics firm, that it was his project. He even showed me your website once. He must have known I wouldn't notice the details. I nodded slowly. He's good at presentation. Her laugh came out cracked. Yeah, guess that's the only thing he's good at. She brushed her hair behind her ear, eyes glassy. When you showed that logo at dinner, I felt like the ground just disappeared. Not because you embarrassed him, but because I realized how blind I've been. I wanted him to be someone impressive, someone Dad would approve of. I didn't even see what he was really doing. Her voice trembled on the next word. I'm sorry, Elena. I should have defended you sooner, She stopped, pressing her lips together. I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering. You don't have to apologize for him. I'm not, she said quickly. I'm apologizing for me for believing him. For believing what Mom and Dad always said about you. That you were fragile, that you didn't really know what you were doing. I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, she didn't seem untouchable. She looked human, small, raw, unsure. The golden light from the cafe window made her look younger, like the sister I used to share cereal with before school, before the years turned her into someone who had to be perfect to be loved. You didn't do anything wrong, I said quietly. You just chose to believe the story that was easier to hear. She blinked, tears threatening. And that makes it okay? It makes you human, I said. We all do it. She nodded, biting her lip. I called off the engagement, she said finally. 2 days after you left. He tried to talk me out of it, said it was all a misunderstanding. But I saw the emails, the fake proposals, everything. You were right, he was just using me for access, for image. I should have seen it. I'm glad you did, I said softly. For a long moment, we sat there in silence, the air between us no longer heavy, just fragile, like something being rebuilt. Sophia looked down at her coffee. Do you think Mom and Dad will ever understand? I smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe they won't. But that's not on us anymore. She looked up then, her eyes red but clearer. Can we start over, you and me? I held her gaze. We already did. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering a few golden leaves across the sidewalk. And for the first time in years, I felt something small and steady settle in my chest. Not triumph, not revenge, just peace. A few days after meeting Sophia, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Not the smug version of him that sat at our Thanksgiving table, but the gaps in his story, the things that didn't add up. People like him always left trails, even if they thought they were clever enough to hide them. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. It was something colder, more deliberate, an instinct to clean up the mess before it reached anyone else I cared about. So I called an old friend, someone I trusted completely. His name was Alex Rivera, a finance analyst I'd known back in college. He'd helped me once before when ClearPoint first started signing clients, and he had a gift for finding what people tried to bury. Alex, I said over the phone. I need a favor, quietly. He chuckled. With that tone, I'm guessing this isn't about debugging code. No, I said. It's about a man named Ethan Price, works for a firm called Wentworth Capital, or says he does. Can you look into him? He hesitated just long enough for me to hear the curiosity on the other end. You think he's dirty? I think he's pretending, I said simply. Give me 48 hours. He didn't even need that long. 2 days later, an encrypted folder appeared in my inbox. I opened it while sitting at my kitchen counter, a mug of coffee growing cold beside me. The report was detailed employment records, financial filings, business registrations, even a few internal memos from industry contacts. And what it showed made everything suddenly, painfully clear. Ethan wasn't a director at Wentworth Capital. He wasn't even in management. His official title was junior broker. He'd been on disciplinary watch for nearly a year after several complaints from clients about aggressive solicitation. He'd bounced between 3 different firms in 5 years, leaving just before performance reviews each time. And the so-called partnership with ClearPoint? It wasn't through his company at all, it was something he'd filed under a side entity he created himself, Evercrest Holdings. On paper, Evercrest was a small consulting group. In reality, it was a shell. No staff, no revenue, no physical address. Just a mailbox in a co-working space and a fake website built with a free template. The deeper Alex's report went, the uglier it became. Ethan had been pitching investment opportunities to small business owners, guaranteed returns, low risk, quick profits. The kind of too good to be true deals that only work until the first person asks to withdraw their money. He hadn't hit the headlines yet, probably because he hadn't stolen enough to attract attention. But the warning signs were all there. My stomach turned as I scrolled through screenshots of emails and forum posts linked to his name. I didn't need Alex to tell me what it meant. Ethan wasn't successful. He was a con artist in a suit. And he'd been using my family's dinner table as a stage. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. I thought about my mother's admiring smile, my father's approving nods, Sophia's soft laughter as she leaned into him. They'd all been hypnotized by his confidence, his charm, the same illusion I'd seen 1,000 times in investors who didn't understand the systems they were buying into. Except this time, the stakes were personal. When I finally called Alex, my voice was calm. "Can you verify everything in this file?" "It's solid," he said. "You planning to do something with it?" "Yes," I said quietly. "But not for revenge. I just don't want anyone else to get caught in it." I hung up and spent the rest of the day compiling everything: emails, registrations, screenshots, every piece of verifiable proof. Then I drafted a letter to the Financial Conduct Authority. It wasn't angry or emotional, just factual, concise, professional. I included my credentials and offered to cooperate if they needed further verification. By evening, I'd uploaded the report to their secure portal. When the confirmation email arrived, I closed my laptop and just sat there, breathing. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved. Ethan's downfall wouldn't make me richer or heal old wounds. But it might save someone else, a family, a young investor, even Sophia, from being trapped in his web again. That was enough. I never told my parents what I did. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew how they'd react. They'd call it unnecessary, say I'd gone too far, or that I should have just let things go for the sake of peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace, it's paralysis. And I was done being paralyzed. That night, I walked down to the Charles River again. The air was colder this time, sharper, but it felt clean. The city lights shimmered over the dark water, and for a moment, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who kept her head down, who measured her worth by the approval she'd never earn. She would have stayed quiet. She would have forgiven too soon. But that version of me was gone now, and in her place stood someone who understood that truth doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. I took one last look at the city skyline, pulled my scarf tighter, and whispered to no one in particular, "That's enough pretending." Then I turned and headed home, ready to face whatever came next with both eyes open this time. 2 weeks later, the city was glowing again, strings of golden lights draped across shop windows, soft carols drifting through the streets. Post-Thanksgiving calm had settled in, and with it came the annual Community Gratitude Dinner, a local event where businesses sponsored meals for shelters and low-income families. My company, ClearPoint Analytics, had quietly funded most of it this year. I didn't put my name on anything: no banners, no logos, no press releases. That wasn't the point. When the invitation list went out, I made sure one table, near the front, had 4 familiar names: Robert and Linda Hart, Sophia, and Ethan Price. They probably thought it was a coincidence, or maybe, knowing my mother, she assumed the organizers had invited us all to heal the family image. I didn't correct her. The event was held in a renovated hotel ballroom near the river, the kind of space that smelled faintly of cinnamon and polished wood. Volunteers moved between tables carrying trays of food, and a local jazz trio played softly in the corner. The air was warm, full of chatter and laughter. When I arrived, my parents were already seated. My mother looked elegant as always, though her smile seemed strained. My father sat stiffly beside her, hands folded, scanning the room like he wasn't sure why he'd come. Sophia spotted me first and waved. Ethan was next to her, wearing that same polished confidence, his tie perfectly knotted, his grin as wide as ever. He raised his glass slightly when I walked past. "Elena," he said smoothly, "good to see you again." "Likewise," I said. My voice was calm, almost pleasant. The dinner began with speeches from local leaders, then a short video about the community projects the charity had supported that year. Faces of families, volunteers, and students flashed across the screen. My mother dabbed at her eyes. When the MC stepped up to the microphone and thanked the event's primary anonymous sponsor, I saw a flicker of confusion cross my father's face. He leaned toward Mom and whispered something, and she shrugged, still smiling. Then the MC said, "Tonight, we'd like to invite the person who made this entire evening possible to say a few words." He turned toward me. "Please welcome Miss Elena Hart." The sound of my name hit the table like a dropped fork. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sophia blinked, slowly. My mother froze mid-smile, and my father's brow furrowed. Ethan's grin faltered just slightly. I stood, smoothing the front of my dress, and made my way to the stage. The microphone was warm beneath my fingertips, and, for a second, the room fell into that perfect, suspended silence. Every face turned toward me. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady. "When I was growing up, family dinners were the measure of belonging. If you had a seat at the table, you mattered. If you didn't, you pretended you didn't care." A quiet ripple moved through the room. "But sometimes," I continued, "you realize that it's not about being given a seat at someone else's table. Sometimes, it's about building your own and leaving space for those who never had one." I smiled softly. "That's why this dinner exists. Not for appearances, but for connection. Because everyone deserves a place to belong." When applause broke out, gentle at first, then warm, spreading through the hall like sunlight. I caught Sophia clapping through tears, and even my mother, hesitant but proud, joined in. And then, just as the sound began to settle, Ethan stood up. He grinned broadly, stepping forward as if he were part of the show. "Beautiful speech, Elena," he said loudly. "And speaking of tables, how about partnerships? Clear point analytics, right? I'm sure everyone here would agree that working with such a talented company must be an honor." The room went quiet again, a ripple of awkward laughter breaking the air. My father nodded approvingly, clearly relieved by the familiarity of business talk. My mother smiled, thinking he was helping smooth things over. I turned slowly to face Ethan. "You're right," I said evenly. "Partnerships are built on trust." "All in," he smirked. "Exactly." I tilted my head, still smiling. "Which is why this next part is important." I reached for the small remote the event team had left by the podium. Behind me, the large projector screen flickered back to life. At first, it showed the ClearPoint logo, crisp and blue. Then, as I clicked again, the slide changed to an email. The subject line read, "Evercrest Holdings Private Investment Proposal." A murmur spread through the audience. Ethan's name was right there in the sender line. I clicked again. A second image appeared, a video still from a recorded Zoom call. Ethan, in his office, confidently pitching guaranteed 40% returns to a group of small business owners. Another click. Screenshots of fake documents, shell accounts, and anonymous forum posts promising risk-free profits. Gasps filled the room. Ethan's face drained of color. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. I looked at him calmly. "Proof," I said softly. "Proof of what happens when someone mistakes charm for integrity." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father sat frozen, pale. Sophia whispered his name once, then again, her voice cracking. Ethan stammered, You can't just, this is slander." "No," I said. "It's truth. Verified, documented, and already submitted to the authorities 2 weeks ago." The whispers in the room turned into quiet shock, like wind moving through leaves. I let the images linger on the screen for a few more seconds before clicking the projector off. The silence that followed was deafening. "I didn't show this to humiliate anyone," I said gently. "I'm not interested in revenge. I just think people deserve to know who they're really applauding and who's really been making this family look bad." For a moment, no one breathed. Ethan stumbled backward, his composure cracking completely. "You set me up," he hissed. "No," I said, my voice almost a whisper now. "You did that yourself." He turned toward Sophia, desperate. "You believe me, don't you?" But Sophia's face was pale and unreadable. She just shook her head, slow and final. "Get out," she said quietly. He stared at her for a heartbeat, then turned and left, the echo of his footsteps cutting through the stillness. When the doors closed behind him, I turned back to the audience and gave a small nod. "Thank you," I said simply. "Let's get back to dinner." Applause didn't come this time. Just silence, stunned, heavy, cleansing. I walked off the stage and back toward my table. My mother's eyes were glassy, my father's expression unreadable. Sophia reached out as I passed, her hand trembling slightly. I squeezed it once, then let go. The rest of the evening moved quietly. People ate, murmured, and pretended to return to normal. But nothing in that room would ever be the same. As I stepped outside later that night, the city air was crisp, the stars faint behind a halo of light. I stood there for a while, breathing in the cold. For the first time in my life, I hadn't been afraid to take up space. And though the night was still, I could feel it, the shift, the unraveling, the truth finally standing tall where pretense used to sit. The image of that long, perfect family table flashed in my mind one last time. This time, I wasn't sitting at it. I was standing, building my own. By the end of that month, the story had begun to spread quietly at first, then like ripples in still water. Ethan Price was under official investigation. The financial authorities had confirmed what my report and Alex's documents had already shown: multiple shell companies, falsified client contracts, and a pattern of deceit that had finally caught up to him. He'd been placed on suspension pending a full audit, his firm distancing itself from him as fast as possible. I saw the announcement in a business news brief one morning while sipping coffee at my apartment. It didn't bring me joy, not the way I might have imagined once. It just felt done. Like closing a heavy book you'd been carrying for too long. Sophia called me 2 days later. I didn't pick up, but she left a voice message. Her voice was calm, steadier than before, but tired. "It's over," she said. "The engagement, the apartment, everything. I told him not to contact me again. I should have listened to you from the start. I'm sorry for letting it go this far." There was a pause, the sound of her breathing on the other end. "Thank you, Elena, for saving me from something I didn't want to see." I listened twice, then deleted the message, not out of anger, but because I didn't need to keep it. Some apologies don't need to be replayed to be real. A week later, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from my mother. The kind of message I never thought I'd receive from her. "Elena, I've been thinking a lot. I'm sorry. For all the years I made you feel like you had to earn a place that was already yours. I was wrong. Completely wrong. You were never the one who made us look bad. You were the only one brave enough to see the truth. I'm proud of you. I hope we can start again someday." For a long time, I just stared at the screen. My mother, the woman who'd spent her whole life polishing every sentence before she spoke it, had finally written something raw. It wasn't wrapped in excuses or softened with advice. It was simple, imperfect, human. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Then I typed another and deleted that too. In the end, I didn't respond at all. Some things are better left to time. A few days later, my father wrote to me too. No long paragraphs, no emotional flourish, just a short text that said, "I read about the investigation. I'm proud. You did the right thing." The words landed differently than I expected. Not like an apology, but like acknowledgement. Something I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for since I was a child. I didn't answer him either. Instead, I sat on my balcony that night, watching the city lights shimmer across the Charles River. The wind carried a faint smell of pine from the park below, and for once, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. It wasn't peace that I felt, not exactly. Peace is too quiet a word for what it takes to rebuild yourself after years of being unseen. What I felt was lighter than that: space, room to breathe. Sophia and I met for coffee a week later, just like we used to before everything became complicated. She looked different, more herself somehow. No makeup, no posture to impress anyone. Just soft eyes and a tired smile. "Heard from Mom and Dad?" I asked. She nodded. "They're still trying to make sense of it all. I think Mom's been crying a lot." "She'll be okay," I said. Sophia sighed. "You think we'll ever be a normal family?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe not normal, but maybe honest." That's better. She nodded, and we let the silence stretch comfortably between us. For once, we didn't need to fill it. Later that night, I went for a walk down by the river again, the same path I'd taken the night I left that dinner. The air was colder now, the water darker, but the city lights still danced on its surface. I thought about the girl I used to be, sitting quietly at the edge of the family table, trying to laugh at jokes that hurt. I thought about the countless dinners I'd endured where I'd swallowed words instead of speaking them, all to keep the peace that wasn't really peace at all. And then I thought about that night, the way my voice didn't shake, the way truth had finally filled the room, the way silence had become my witness. Some people spend their lives chasing validation. I used to be one of them. But, standing there by the river, I realized I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. Not my father's, not my mother's, not the world's. The only thing I'd ever really wanted was stillness, the kind that comes when you stop trying to fit into rooms that were never built for you. I walked until the cold began to bite at my cheeks. Then I stopped and looked back at the skyline, the lights flickering like constellations in motion. Somewhere out there, my family was probably still trying to piece together what had happened, and that was fine. Their lessons would come in their own time. As for me, I finally felt ready to begin again. No more proving, no more shrinking. Just quiet, steady truth. When I got home, I lit a single candle on my desk, the one I'd kept from the charity dinner, engraved with the words, "For those who build their own tables." I watched the flame flicker and thought of all the faces that had looked at me differently now, not out of admiration, but out of understanding. Then I whispered, softly but with certainty, "I don't need to be invited anymore." Ah! And for the first time in my life, that sentence didn't sound like defiance. It sounded like freedom. A month passed. Boston had shifted into that soft, golden phase of winter where the air was cold enough to bite, but the sunlight still carried a little warmth, like an apology. The Charles River had grown quiet, the trees almost bare now, their last few leaves spinning gently onto the water. ClearPoint Analytics was running smoothly, but my attention had turned somewhere else. Something smaller. Something that mattered in a different way. That morning, I stood in the community hall we'd rented for the weekend. Rows of old desks filled the space, each one holding a secondhand laptop we'd repaired and set up. On the whiteboard, in my handwriting, were the words, "Free Tech Workshop for Students Who Dream Bigger." It had started as an idea after the charity dinner, a message that kept echoing in my mind. If I'd spent so many years trying to earn a seat at someone else's table, maybe it was time to build a new one. A table for people who'd been overlooked the same way I once was. Volunteers were setting up the projector, laughing softly as they tested the slides. The smell of coffee drifted from a corner where someone had brought donuts for the morning session. I walked toward the entrance, where a small wooden sign hung from a string. The words on it made me stop for a moment and smile. "You don't need their table, build your own." It wasn't just a phrase anymore, it was a promise. Around 10, students began to arrive. Most of them were college kids from low-income backgrounds, some still in high school. They came in with wide eyes, hesitant smiles, and notebooks full of hope. I watched them settle into their seats, their hands hovering over the keyboards, a mix of excitement and uncertainty on their faces. When I started speaking, I didn't talk about algorithms or systems or business. I talked about failure, about being underestimated, about hearing no so many times that you start to wonder if maybe they're right. I told them what it felt like to be invisible in rooms that were too loud for truth. And then I told them the one thing I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't have to wait for permission to matter. The room was silent for a heartbeat, and then, one by one, I saw heads lift, eyes sharpen, something flicker alive in their expressions. It was small, but real. After the first session ended, I stepped outside to get some air. The city smelled of roasted chestnuts and pine. People were bundled up, laughing as they passed by, the rhythm of life steady and forgiving. I pulled out my phone and hesitated before making a call. It rang twice before my mother's voice came through, soft but familiar. "Elena?" "Hi, Mom," I said, smiling. "How are you?" "I'm fine," she said, though her tone was cautious, gentle. "I heard about the workshop. The news mentioned ClearPoint's sponsorship." "It's just something small," I said, "for students who need a start." "It's not small," she replied quietly. "It's wonderful." For a moment, we both listened to the sound of wind rustling through the receiver. "I'm giving a talk next week," I said finally. "At the university. It's not a big event, just some first-year students. But if you want to come, maybe get there early. Seats fill up fast." There was a pause, and then a soft laugh. "I'll be there," she said. "Early, I promise." After we hung up, I stood there for a while, the phone still warm in my hand. Across the street, a line of golden leaves broke free from a tree, spinning in slow circles before landing on the pavement. The air was crisp, but the sunlight was kind. When I went back inside, the students were laughing at something one of the volunteers had said. A girl near the front looked up and waved shyly, and I waved back. The sound filled the room, young, unpolished, hopeful. I realized, then, that this was what peace really looked like. Not silence, not distance, but connection, honest and earned. Later that afternoon, as the workshop ended, I stood near the back of the room watching them pack up. Some stopped to thank me, others lingered to ask questions, eyes bright with possibility. I told them they were already capable of more than they knew. That all they needed was a chance and the courage to take it. When the last student left, I turned off the lights and looked at the empty chairs. Sunlight streamed in through the high windows, catching the dust in the air, turning it into gold. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing it in, the warmth, the stillness, the quiet power of knowing that I no longer needed anyone's permission to exist fully. As I locked the door and stepped outside, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the park nearby. I pulled my scarf tighter and whispered, half to myself, half to the universe. "This year, I'm not celebrating to be accepted." The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the scent of cinnamon and leaves. "I'm celebrating," I said, smiling, "because for the first time I chose my own table." And as I walked away, sunlight fell across the sidewalk in wide, golden stripes, and for the first time in a very long time, the world felt exactly the right size.